For centuries, humanity played the galaxy's ultimate peacemaker. We negotiated, compromised, and smiled through gritted teeth while arrogant alien empires took our deliberate kindness for inherent weakness. They thought we had forgotten how to fight. They were drastically wrong. When diplomacy finally died, the true apex predators awoke. Silence hung heavy in the grand assembly of Sirius Prime, a cavernous, crystalline amphitheater where the fates of billions were decided over polite tea and veiled threats. Ambassador Aeon Butler adjusted the cuffs of his immaculate navy suit, keeping his expression carefully neutral. Beside him, the holographic readout of the galactic map pulsed with a soft, unassuming blue glow. For 80 years, that blue had represented humanity's borders, a modest, non-threatening expanse of agricultural worlds, medical outposts, and trade hubs. We had introduced ourselves to the stars, not as conquerors, but as healers and engineers. We had buried our violent history deep, locking away our arsenals and presenting a face of unwavering, almost naive pacifism. Across the curved obsidian table sat High Counselor Vorik of the Kalan hegemony. Vorik was a massive reptilian biped clad in ceremonial armor that hummed with energy shielding. The Kalan were conquerors, a species that viewed diplomacy merely as a cost-effective alternative to orbital bombardment. Until today, humanity had always acquiesced to their minor incursions, paying heavy tariffs and seeding border asteroids to maintain the peace. The terms are quite simple. Ambassador Butler, Vorik hissed, his translator implant rendering his guttural native tongue into crisp, aristocratic English. The Kalan hegemony requires the immediate transfer of the New Geneva and Horizon agricultural colonies. Your people will evacuate within 3 standard cycles. In exchange, we will graciously allow your medical frigates safe passage through the Orion Corridor. It is a generous offer. Do not test our patience. Aeon clasped his hands on the table. High Counselor, New Geneva is home to 4 million human civilians. It took them 3 generations to terraform that soil. You cannot simply demand we abandon our homes under the guise of an arbitrary border adjustment. It violates the core tenets of the Galactic Accords. The Accords, Vorik sneered, revealing a row of serrated teeth, are a comfort for the weak. They are upheld by the strong. And humanity, with your unarmed cargo haulers and your pitiful diplomatic escorts, is uniquely unqualified to lecture us on strength. You will sign the transfer, Butler, or we will simply take the worlds by force, and your precious civilians will become a footnote in our expansion. Aeon took a slow, deep breath. He had spent his entire career swallowing pride to save lives. He was prepared to offer trade concessions, rare earth metals, perhaps even a joint administration treaty. But an outright annexation? The evacuation of 4 million people? It was extortion on a scale even the Kalan had never dared attempt. Before Aeon could formulate a placating response, the encrypted datapad in his pocket vibrated with a priority override. Only one person had the clearance to interrupt a Grand Assembly session. Aeon discreetly slipped the device onto his lap. The message was from Diego Ramos, Earth's Director of Extraterrestrial Intelligence. It was brief, completely devoid of diplomatic pleasantries, and accompanied by a terrifying string of raw tactical data. Negotiations are a distraction. Kalan Vanguard fleet crossed the Horizon perimeter 20 minutes ago. They did not demand surrender. They fired on the orbital tethers. 2 civilian transports destroyed. Casualties estimated at 40,000. They are glassing the southern hemisphere as we speak. Aeon stared at the glowing text. A cold alien sensation washed over him. It wasn't panic. It wasn't even grief. It was an ancient, primal stillness. For generations, human leaders had suppressed the genetic memory of war, terrified that if they let the monster out of the cage, the galaxy would unite to exterminate them. They had built a culture of aggressive niceness, forcing themselves to be the adults in a universe full of petulant, heavily armed toddlers. But the Kalan hadn't just crossed a border, they had crossed the line. Aeon looked up. Vorik was still grinning, tapping a claw against the obsidian table, waiting for the human to fold, waiting for the familiar capitulation. "Tell me, Vorik," Aeon said, his voice dropping the diplomatic lilt, becoming flat and hard. Did you authorize the strike on Horizon? Vork's grin faltered for a fraction of a second, surprised by the sudden breach of protocol. I am unaware of any strike, but if our vanguard has grown impatient, it only proves my point. Sign the treaty, Butler. 40,000 civilians are dead, Aeon stated. The murmurs in the Grand Assembly died down. Representatives from a dozen other species leaned in, sensing a shift in the atmospheric pressure of the room. Unarmed transports. You fired on colony ships. An unfortunate miscalculation of war. Vorik dismissed with a wave of his claw. A tragedy that could have been avoided if your species understood its place. You are farmers, humans. Do not attempt to play games with predators. Aeon stood up. He didn't hurry. He methodically buttoned his suit jacket, picked up his datapad, and looked directly into Vorik's reptilian eyes. You have made a fundamental miscalculation, High Counselor, Aeon said, his voice echoing through the silent amphitheater. You looked at our medical ships, our agricultural worlds, our endless patience, and you diagnosed us with weakness. You thought we were peaceful because we lacked the capacity for violence. Aeon leaned across the table, his eyes burning with an intensity that made the massive alien flinch backward. We are not peaceful because we are weak, Aeon whispered, yet every microphone in the room caught the deadly promise in his tone. We are peaceful because we know exactly what we are capable of when we stop holding back. We are peaceful because, for the last 80 years, we have been trying to protect you from us. Aeon turned to the rest of the assembly, his gaze sweeping over the shocked faces of the galactic delegates. Humanity formally withdraws from the Grand Assembly. The Kalan hegemony has initiated an unprovoked war of extermination. Let the record show that we tried to be nice. We said, please. We said, thank you. And now we say, enough. As Aeon walked out of the chamber, his datapad vibrated once more. He drafted a single, one-word message to Earth High Command. Archangel. Admiral Sarah Jenkins stood on the command deck of the orbital fortress Aegis, hidden deep within the icy debris of the Oort cloud. The station was cloaked, running on minimal thermal output, practically invisible against the cosmic background radiation. Sarah was a woman carved from granite, a veteran of the secretive Inter-System Defense Forces who had spent her entire life training for a war she prayed would never come. For decades, the United Nations of Earth had maintained two distinct fleets. The public fleet, known to the galaxy, consisted of shiny, white-hulled diplomatic cruisers, deep space exploration vessels, and medical frigates armed with nothing more than basic meteor deflection lasers. Then there was the Dark Fleet. Built in secret shipyards hidden behind Jupiter's storms and buried beneath the ice of Enceladus, the Dark Fleet was humanity's insurance policy. They were ugly, brutalistic machines of war. No sleek aerodynamic curves, no observation decks, no white paint. They were jagged slabs of depleted uranium armor, bristling with spinal-mounted kinetic railguns, nuclear-shaped charges, and point defense networks designed to shred incoming plasma. Transmission received from Ambassador Butler, Admiral, the communications officer called out, his voice tight with nervous energy. Authentication confirmed. Code, Archangel. Sarah closed her eyes for a brief moment. The waiting was over. The charade was done. Sound General Quarters, Sarah ordered, her voice ringing out with absolute authority. Drop the thermal shrouds. Spin up the fusion drives. Wake the sleeping giants. Klaxons howled through the massive station. Around the Aegis, the empty vacuum of space began to shimmer. Massive cloaking fields collapsed, revealing the true might of the Terran Navy. 300 Goliath-class dreadnoughts, each the size of a flying city, powered their engines, casting an eerie crimson glow across the surrounding ice asteroids. Tactical! Give me the situation at Horizon, Sarah demanded, striding over to the central holodable. Kalan Vanguard Fleet has established a blockade over the colony, the tactical officer reported, bringing up a red-tinted holographic projection. 80 warships. Cruisers and plasma destroyers, they are systematically bombarding the defense shields of the northern settlements. The planetary shields will fail in exactly 42 minutes. After that, total planetary annihilation. Not on my watch, Sarah growled. Calculate a microjump. We don't drop in at the system's edge. We drop right in the middle of their formation. Admiral, a micro-jump of that mass into a gravity well could cause severe spatial shear, the helmsman warned. Let them worry about the shear. execute. 4 light-years away, in the orbit of Horizon, Kalen Fleetmaster Vorlok watched the bombardment with bored satisfaction. The human shields were holding, but it was only a matter of time. It was almost disappointing. He had hoped the humans might at least try to scramble their pathetic little security cutters so his gunners could get some target practice. Fleetmaster. A sensor operator hissed, his scales rattling in alarm. Massive spatial distortion detected. Dead ahead. It's tearing the local fabric. Is it a spatial anomaly? Vorlak demanded, gripping the railing of his command dais. No, sir. It's an artificial warp signature. Massive displacement. Ships dropping out of FTL. Space itself seemed to tear open in a blinding flash of Cherenkov radiation. When the light faded, the Kalen bridge crew stared at their view screens in paralyzed horror. There, sitting squarely in the middle of their blockade formation, were ships unlike anything the Kalen had ever encountered. They weren't elegant. They looked like massive, floating weapons platforms, entirely devoid of aesthetic grace, built solely to inflict maximum trauma. Before Vorlak could even issue an order to raise their forward energy shields, the lead human dreadnought, the TFS Retribution, opened fire. Humanity hadn't bothered adapting alien plasma weaponry. They found energy weapons inefficient against heavily shielded targets. Instead, human engineers had perfected kinetic impactors. The Retribution's spinal railgun accelerated a 3-ton slug of dense tungsten to a fraction of the speed of light. There was no sound in space, but the visual impact was catastrophic. The Kalen energy shields, designed to absorb and dissipate heat from plasma bolts, simply shattered under the sheer kinetic force of the solid projectile. The tungsten slug ripped through the shielding, punched entirely through the armored prow of a Kalen heavy cruiser, traveled the entire length of the ship, and exited the engineering section, obliterating the core. The Kalen cruiser erupted in a silent, blossoming sphere of blue fire. "Return fire! All ships, return fire!" Vorlak screamed, panic finally shattering his aristocratic composure. The Kalen fleet unleashed a torrent of superheated plasma at the human formation. The bolts struck the human dreadnoughts, washing over their hulls in blinding waves of heat. But humanity had spent a century preparing for exactly this. The Goliath-class ships were coated in ablative armor and electromagnetic dispersal fields. The plasma scorched the outer layers, leaving glowing scars, but failed to penetrate the thick uranium plating. "They're barely scratching the paint," Sarah Jenkins noted, from the bridge of the Retribution, analyzing the damage reports. "All right, let's show them why you don't poke the bear." Fleet-wide, authorization granted for nuclear deployment. Clear the sky. The human dreadnoughts unleashed their broadsides. Thousands of missile bays opened simultaneously. The sky above Horizon filled with a terrifying swarm of exhaust trails, as swarms of variable-yield nuclear torpedoes accelerated toward the Kalen fleet. The Kalen point defense lasers managed to shoot down dozens of the incoming projectiles, but the human missiles were programmed with evasive algorithms, violently jerking and weaving through the defensive fire. When the warheads detonated, it wasn't a random explosion. They were shaped charges, directing the fury of a nuclear blast into concentrated lances of X-ray radiation. Dozens of Kalen ships were sliced apart in an instant, their hulls buckling and melting under the apocalyptic assault. In less than 10 minutes, the Kalen Vanguard fleet, a force that had terrorized a dozen star systems, was reduced to a sprawling field of molten, drifting slag. Target destroyed. "Blockade broken," the tactical officer announced, the bridge erupting in controlled cheers. Sarah didn't smile. She stared at the wreckage. "Send a tight beam transmission to the planetary surface. Tell Horizon they are safe. Then, patch me through to Earth intelligence. We need to know where the rest of these bastards are." Back on Earth, within the subterranean bunkers of the Geneva Intelligence Directorate, Diego Ramos was drowning in data. The Director of Extraterrestrial Intelligence was a man who lived in the shadows of the galaxy. While diplomats smiled and admirals prepared for war, Diego was the one digging through the encrypted dirt of alien empires. The absolute massacre of the Kalen Vanguard fleet had sent shockwaves across the galaxy. The Galactic Assembly was in a state of absolute panic. The peaceful farmers had just demonstrated a capacity for violence that bordered on the terrifying. But Diego wasn't celebrating the victory at Horizon. He was staring at a massive holographic web connecting Kalen's supply lines, encrypted communication nodes, and deep space banking transactions. Something wasn't right. The Kalen were arrogant, yes, but they weren't stupid. They had a formidable military, but attacking human space without a complete understanding of Earth's defense capabilities was tactically unsound. The intelligence didn't add up. Why did the Kalen believe humanity was completely unarmed? Diego paced around the terminal, rubbing his temples. He was a meticulous man, relying on logic where others relied on emotion. Computer cross-reference Kalen tactical data, uploads with the diplomatic registry of the Orokin Syndicate over the last 5 years. The computer hummed, sorting through petabytes of intercepted data. The Orokin Syndicate was a race of tall, slender avians who prided themselves on being the galaxy's premier information brokers and neutral diplomats. They had been the ones to sponsor humanity's entry into the Grand Assembly. They were supposed to be our allies. Match found, the computer's synthetic voice chimed. Encrypted data packets transferred from Orokin Embassy on Earth to Kalen Military High Command. Contents: falsified human military capabilities, shield harmonics of civilian transports, and assurances of non-retaliation. Diego's blood ran cold. He pulled up the files. It was all there. The Orokin Syndicate hadn't just stood by while the Kalen attacked. They had orchestrated it. The Orokins had fed the Kalen doctored intelligence, convincing them that humanity would roll over and surrender the agricultural worlds. But why? Diego dug deeper, breaking through the Orokin encryption keys using brute force quantum algorithms. He found a series of secret treaties between the Orokins and the Kalen. If the Kalen conquered the human colony worlds, they had agreed to grant the Orokin Syndicate exclusive mining rights to the rich asteroid belts in the Sol system. The Orokins wanted Earth's resources, but they didn't want to dirty their own wings fighting for them. They had used the Kalen as an attack dog, expecting humanity to be an easy, profitable meal. They sold us out, Diego whispered into the silent room. They engineered the slaughter at Horizon to make a profit. He immediately established a secure quantum-entangled line to Aeon Butler, who is currently aboard a fast courier ship returning to Earth. Aeon, it's Diego. We have a massive complication, Diego said as the diplomat's tired face appeared on the monitor. I've heard about Horizon, Aeon replied, his voice heavy. Sarah held the line. But the Grand Assembly is screaming for our blood. They're calling us war criminals for using kinetic and nuclear weaponry. They are threatening a unified coalition against us. Let them threaten, Diego said sharply, transmitting the decoded files to Aeon's datapad. Look at this. The Kalen were just the muscle. The Orokin Syndicate pulled the strings. They fed the Kalen false intel and pushed them to attack us so they could sweep in and seize our resource claims during the chaos. Aeon's eyes scanned the documents, his expression hardening with every passing second. The Orokins. The species that had smiled at him shared tea with him and preached the virtues of galactic harmony while secretly plotting the murder of millions of human civilians. I see, Aeon said softly. The rage in his voice was cold, absolute zero. We thought we were fighting a border war against a pack of thugs, but the entire system is rotten. The Grand Assembly is a cartel, and we were the designated prey. What are your orders, Ambassador? Diego asked. Do we release this to the galactic press? Try to clear our name? No, Aeon replied, shaking his head. They don't respect the truth, Diego. They only respect power. If we expose the Orokins through diplomatic channels, they will deny it, the Assembly will form a committee, and the Kalen will regroup. We are done playing by their rules. Aeon looked up, staring directly into the camera. Contact Admiral Jenkins. Tell her the defensive phase of this war is over. I want the Dark Fleet mobilized. We are going to strike the Orokin homeworld. Diego blinked, stunned. Aeon. The Orokin homeworld, Ethelgard, is the administrative heart of the Galactic Assembly. Striking it would be a declaration of war against the entire established order. The established order tried to exterminate us for a profit margin, Aeon countered, his voice ringing with absolute certainty. They poked the bear, Diego. Now, they get the claws. Send the intelligence to Sarah. Tell her to prepare for a deep strike. Thousands of light years away, Admiral Sarah Jenkins received the intelligence package. She stood on the bridge of the Retribution, watching the repair crews weld armor plating back onto her scarred dreadnoughts. When she read Diego's report, her jaw tightened. The grief over the 40,000 dead civilians at Horizon morphed into a laser-focused, righteous fury. She turned to her communications officer. "Patch me through to the entire fleet." The holoprojectors flickered, casting Sarah's imposing figure into the bridge of every human warship in the Armada. "Marines, sailors, pilots of the Terran Navy," Sarah began, her voice echoing through the steel corridors of 300 dreadnoughts. "For a century, we hid in the dark. We allowed ourselves to be insulted, extorted, and demeaned because we believed peace was worth the sacrifice of our pride. We believed that if we showed them the better angels of our nature, they would learn by example." She paused, her eyes fierce. "We were wrong. They took our compassion and weaponized it against us. The attack on Horizon was not an accident. It was a conspiracy. The Orokin Syndicate orchestrated the murder of our people for mining rights. They believe we will cry, complain to the Assembly, and beg for justice." Sarah drew herself up to her full height. "We are not going to beg. We are going to teach the galaxy a lesson they will never forget. We are charting a course for Ethelgard. We will bypass their border guards. We will smash their defensive fleets. We will tear down the Orokin Syndicate from the top down." Cheers erupted across the fleet, a primal roar of defiance echoing in the void. "We stopped being nice today," Sarah concluded. "Tomorrow, we show them exactly why the Dark Fleet exists. Helm, lock coordinates for the Orokin core system. All ships spool FTL drives. Prepare to jump on my mark." As the massive armada vanished into slipspace, leaving behind nothing but the drifting, frozen wreckage of the Kalan fleet, a fundamental shift occurred in the balance of the galaxy. The era of the human peacemaker was dead. The age of the human warlord had begun, and hell itself was marching alongside them. Ethelgard was a masterpiece of planetary engineering and the undisputed jewel of the Galactic Assembly. Unlike the brutalist, smog-choked factory worlds of the Kalan hegemony, the Orokin homeworld was a testament to elegance and perceived superiority. Delicate silver orbital rings encircled the cerulean planet, housing billions of avian aristocrats, diplomats, and trade brokers. Down on the surface, massive spire cities pierced through pristine, artificially managed clouds. It was a world that had not seen a single armed conflict in over 4,000 years. The Orokin Syndicate believed their political leverage and economic absolute monopolies made them utterly untouchable. High Chancellor Preston, the supreme leader of the Orokin Syndicate, stood in his opulent observation spire, nursing a goblet of imported nectar. He was a creature of refined tastes, his plumage a meticulous blend of ivory and gold. He was currently reviewing the preliminary economic projections for the annexation of the human colony of Horizon. The numbers were magnificent. With humanity broken and the Kalan doing all the dirty work, the Orokin mining consortiums would swoop in to harvest the Sol System's asteroid belts, doubling the Syndicate's gross domestic product in a single decade. Chancellor, his chief attaché chirped, rushing into the observation deck with a profound lack of decorum. Her feathers were puffed out in an involuntary display of severe distress. "We have a Class Omega spatial rupture forming directly inside our orbital perimeter. It is bypassing the outer system warning buoys completely." Preston frowned, setting his goblet down on a polished marble pedestal. "A spatial rupture? That is impossible. Our planetary disruption fields prevent any faster-than-light translations within 10 million kilometers. No vessel can jump directly into Ethelgard's orbit." "Sir, the disruption fields are. They are being shredded," the attaché stammered, pointing a trembling talon toward the massive crystalline window. "Look!" Preston turned just in time to witness the fundamental laws of galactic physics being violently rewritten. The space above Ethelgard did not just warp, it fractured. Massive streaks of crimson energy tore through the velvet darkness of the void. And then the monsters arrived. 300 Terran Goliath-class dreadnoughts ripped themselves out of slip space, their colossal jagged hulls blotting out the light of Ethelgard's sun. They were brutal, scarred, and entirely devoid of the sleek aesthetics the Oricans prized. Leading the armada was the TFS Retribution, still bearing the fresh, scorched plasma burns from the massacre at Horizon. The panic across the orbital rings was instantaneous and catastrophic. Sirens that had not been tested in centuries wailed uselessly. Thousands of luxury pleasure yachts and diplomatic cruisers scrambled to detach from the docking bays, only to be immediately trapped by a massive, localized gravity well projected by the human fleet. "Open a channel to the lead human vessel," Preston demanded, his heart hammering violently against his ribs. He forced his voice into a calm, authoritative cadence. He was a diplomat. He could talk his way out of this. He always did. The main holographic projector in the spire flickered, replacing the economic charts with the cold, unyielding face of Admiral Sarah Jenkins. She was dressed in tactical fatigues, her expression carved from absolute ice. "Admiral Jenkins," Preston began, projecting his most soothing, reasonable tone. "This is a grave misunderstanding. You have breached the sovereign airspace of the Galactic Assembly's administrative capital. I strongly advise you to power down your weapons and prepare to receive our diplomatic envoys. Whatever the Kalen have done to your people, the Syndicate is here to mediate a peaceful—" "Save your breath, Preston," Sarah interrupted, her voice slicing through his rhetoric like a monomolecular blade. "We know everything. We know about the falsified shield harmonics. We know about the secret mining treaties. We know you fed the Kalen the coordinates to Horizon and guaranteed them a bloodless victory." Preston's beak clicked shut. A cold dread pooled in his stomach. Impossible, he thought. The encryption on those treaties was absolute. "You are making baseless accusations, Admiral," Preston countered, puffing his chest out. "If you fire a single shot upon Ethelgard, the entire Grand Assembly will unite to burn Earth to cinders. We have automated defense grids built by the ancients. You cannot win a war against the entire galaxy." Aboard the Retribution, Sarah Jenkins leaned forward, her eyes locking with the avian chancellors. "We aren't fighting the entire galaxy, Preston. Just the parasites pulling the strings. And as for your ancient defense grids, you might want to check your local networks." Down in the subterranean intelligence bunkers on Earth, Diego Ramos executed the final keystroke of a cyber warfare campaign that had taken him 30 sleepless hours to compile. The Orican technological infrastructure was incredibly advanced, but it was also incredibly stagnant. They had relied on the same firewall architecture for centuries, believing it invincible. Diego didn't just breach their networks, he completely shattered them. On Ethelgard, every screen, every public holoboard, every personal comlink, and every planetary defense terminal simultaneously went black. A second later, they flared back to life, broadcasting the unredacted, decrypted files of the Orican Kalen conspiracy. Billions of citizens across the planet, and trillions more watching across the galactic news relays, were suddenly presented with indisputable proof of their leader's treachery. "Sir, the automated defense platforms are completely unresponsive," Preston's attaché shrieked. "The humans have locked us out of our own mainframes." "It's not just a lockout," Sarah Jenkins's voice echoed from the broadcast, now echoing across every street and spire on the planet below. "It's a demonstration. Tactical." Sarah ordered on her bridge, "Target the Syndicate's military shipyards on the northern orbital ring. Evacuate all civilian workers using the localized comm override. Give them 3 minutes, then execute a localized kinetic strike." 3 minutes later, a dozen human dreadnoughts fired their secondary railguns. They didn't use nuclear ordnance. They didn't need to. Solid slugs of depleted uranium, traveling at unimaginable speeds, slammed into the orbital shipyards. The precision was terrifying. The kinetic impacts shattered the military manufacturing sector into billions of pieces of drifting shrapnel, yet the civilian habitations merely 2 kilometers away were left completely untouched, save for the violent shudder of the shockwave. Preston fell to his knees in his spire, watching a millennia of Orican military supremacy evaporate in less than 30 seconds. The humans were not just brutes who had stumbled upon heavy weaponry. They were surgical. They were brilliant. And they were utterly ruthless. That was a warning, Sarah Jenkins broadcasted to the trembling planet. The Orican Syndicate military forces will surrender unconditionally. Your government will be dismantled, and Chancellor Preston will be handed over to human authorities to face trial for war crimes. You have exactly 1 hour to comply. If you do not, we will target the planetary government spires next. We stopped playing nice. Do not make us prove it again. 1 week later, the atmosphere in the Grand Assembly on Sirius Prime was unrecognizable. The polite murmurs, the arrogant posturing, and the veiled threats that had defined galactic politics for centuries were completely gone. In their place was a suffocating, terrified silence. The vast crystalline amphitheater was packed to capacity. Representatives from over 100 alien species sat rigidly in their floating pods. The Kalan delegation was drastically reduced. High Counselor Vorik sat with his head bowed, stripped of his ceremonial armor, looking every bit like a beaten predator. The Orican pod was completely empty, their leadership currently sitting in maximum security containment cells beneath the Nevada desert on Earth. The heavy obsidian doors of the chamber opened, and Ambassador Aeon Butler walked in. He was not wearing the modest, unassuming navy suit of a peaceful negotiator. He wore the crisp, high-collared dress uniform of a Terran High Commissioner. He was flanked not by protocol droids, but by 4 towering human marines clad in powered combat armor, their visors opaque, their heavy pulse rifles resting easily in their grips. Every eye in the chamber tracked Aeon as he strode to the center of the floor. He didn't wait to be recognized by a presiding speaker. The old rules no longer applied. "A week ago," Aeon began, his voice amplified without the need for a microphone, cutting through the silence like a whip crack. "I stood in this very room and asked for basic decency. I asked you to respect the lives of 4 million innocent farmers, and you laughed." Aeon slowly paced the center circle, his gaze sweeping over the assembled dignitaries. "You mistook our medical ships for cowardice. You mistook our agricultural treaties for submission. You built a system where the strong prey on the weak, and because we chose to be gentle, you classified us as prey." He stopped, turning his piercing gaze directly upon High Counselor Vorik. The massive reptilian alien refused to meet his eyes. "The Kalan hegemony's vanguard fleet no longer exists," Aeon stating a fact that still sent shivers down the spines of the alien delegates. "The Orican Syndicate's government has been dismantled, their shipyards reduced to dust, and their leaders arrested. We broke the 2 greatest powers in this assembly in less than 72 hours, and we did it using a fraction of our naval capacity." A collective gasp echoed through the chamber. A fraction? The terrifying armada that had subjugated Ethelgard was only a fraction of their strength? "So, what happens now?" an ambassador from the Lyran Star Empire asked, his voice trembling slightly. "Do you intend to burn us all? Are you the new conquerors of the galaxy?" Aeon stopped pacing. He looked up at the Lyran delegate, his expression softening just a fraction, though his eyes remained hard. "No," Aeon replied. "Conquest is a waste of time, and extermination is the tool of cowards. We are not going to destroy the Grand Assembly. We are going to take it over." He pulled a physical data drive from his pocket and tossed it onto the central holotable. It projected a massive, sprawling document, translated instantly into 100 different languages. "This is the Pax Tirana," Aeon declared. "It is not a treaty. It is a new reality. Effective immediately. The Terran Navy is assuming absolute control of all primary hyperlane corridors. All species are permitted to maintain defensive fleets within their own borders, but any unauthorized military excursion across sovereign lines will be met with immediate, overwhelming, and disproportionate kinetic retaliation." Aeon pointed a finger at the Kalan delegation. "There will be no more border skirmishes. There will be no more blockades. There will be no more extortion. If a single species in this galaxy attempts to conquer another, the human Dark Fleet will arrive, and we will remove your capacity to wage war permanently." "You cannot police the entire galaxy," Vorik suddenly erupted, finding a desperate scrap of his old pride. "You are just one species. You will overextend, and you will fall." "Try us." Aeon shot back, his voice dropping to a dangerous, deadly whisper. "Please, give Admiral Jenkins an excuse to test our new deep space deployment algorithms. Give Director Ramos a reason to completely shut down your global power grids from 3 sectors away. We spent a century holding back the darkness in our own nature so we could be a light in this galaxy. You forced us to let the darkness out. You do not want to see what happens if you push us to use it again." Vorik slumped back into his seat, the last remnants of his defiance completely broken. "We wanted to be your healers," Aeon said, his voice echoing with a profound, heavy sadness that chilled the room more than any threat could. "We wanted to be your engineers, your friends, your equals. But you demanded monsters. So, we will be your monsters. We will be the apex predators that keep the lesser predators in line." Aeon adjusted his cuffs, a ghost of his old diplomatic habits resurfacing, though the context was completely changed. "The human race will protect the weak, we will enforce the peace, and we will ensure that the horrors of Horizon never happen to anyone ever again," Aeon concluded, turning his back on the central podium and walking toward the exit. "You have your new laws. I suggest you learn to live by them, because we are done being nice." The heavy obsidian doors slammed shut behind him, sealing the fate of the galaxy. A new era had begun. The age of arrogance and petty empires was over, crushed beneath the unyielding weight of human resolve. The galaxy had finally found peace, enforced by the very species they had tried to destroy. Did you get chills watching humanity unleash its true power? When diplomacy fails, the gloves come off, and this is just the beginning of the Terran Navy's wrath. If you love this HFY story and want to see the epic conclusion, smash that like button, hit share to spread the human dominance, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a sci-fi adventure. The galaxy isn't ready for what's next.
Hi, my name is Tran Trung, the owner and manager of Palace Truths. After watching the video, Humans Stopped Being Nice and Said Enough, What Came Next Was War, _HFY Sci-Fi Stories, I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? What stood out to me most was the feeling of tension and resolve. HFY stories often explore the moment when patience reaches its limit and difficult choices have to be made. That shift from restraint to action can create some of the most memorable moments in science fiction. One gentle lesson I took from this story is that strength isn't only about power, it's also about knowing when to stand firm and protect what matters. In everyday life, setting healthy boundaries and speaking up respectfully can be just as important. What moment had the biggest impact on you? And do you think the conflict could have been avoided, or was it inevitable from the start? Thank you for spending time with Palace Truths. If this story gave you something to think about, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments, and maybe like or subscribe for more HFY stories and sci-fi adventures.